This interview with Blair Imani was featured at the 3rd Annual New Mexico Diversity Conference for Youth on February 20th, 2021. The New Mexico Diversity Conference for Youth was organized by Youth Celebrate Diversity, with support from RBC Wealth Management,
Boeing,
and the Albuquerque Public Schools Education Foundation. For more information or to get involved, visit ycdiversity.org. Welcome, everyone. My name is Jaden Adeyemi, one of this year's co-chairs for the New Mexico Youth Diversity Conference. I currently reside in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and will be graduating high school this May. I am a youth leader, restorative justice advocate, artist, and aspiring writer. Today, I am joined by the wonderful Blair Imani. Blair Imani is a critically acclaimed historian, social activist, public speaker, educator, and influencer. She is the author of 2 historical books, Modern Her Story, Stories of Women and Non-Binary People Rewriting History and Making Our Way Home, The Great Migration, and the Black American Dream. The New York Times praises Blair Imani's unique brand, combining progressive lessons with vibrant visuals and a perky, quirky delivery. Her work centers women and girls, global Black communities, and the LGBTQ community. As an influencer and historian, semi-retired organizer, and public speaker, Blair Imani is dedicated to making the world a better place and amplifying the voices and work of those fighting the good fight. So with that being said, I would like to welcome Blair Imani.
hello. Thank you so much for having me. And wow, absolutely amazing. This conference, the intro video just speaks to the organizing power of young people. Well done to everyone who's contributed to this project, to the 4 singers who gave a beautiful rendition of one of my favorite songs. And just, yes, keep it up. And it just shows that in places that we tend to not look for progressive action is absolutely happening in New Mexico. So well done, and I'm excited for this talk.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us. So for those watching who may not know a lot about you and your work, would you start by sharing a little bit about your identity?
Absolutely. So I describe myself as a Black bisexual Muslim woman in that order. No particular reason for that order, but it's important to me. I am Black. Both my parents are Black. I'm lighter skinned. So if we look at intersectionality frameworks, right, that's often our identities, but it's also the overlapping identities and how they relate to systems of oppression and of privilege. And so I can't just say my identities. I also have to examine how I'm impacted by different systems of oppression. So Black, bisexual, Muslim woman. That also means that I'm affected by anti-Blackness, but I benefit from colorism. Then it also means that I am harmed by biphobia and homophobia, Islamophobia, sexism, and so on. And so it's these simultaneous things, and we get that framework, of course, from Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw. So that's my context, but also we are our identities, but also our personal context. I'm from Los Angeles, California. I went to school at Louisiana State University with a degree in history. I'm a published historian of 2 historical books and working on my 3rd one. That's what I'll be doing after we finish up today, is finishing those edits. And today I'm an educator on Instagram, and it's been really exciting. I've been able to do that since about June this past year. And I have a classroom larger than the amount of people who live in Honolulu, Hawaii, and I call my followers Smarties. And it's just been a really interesting way to innovate on the education model and use things like micro-learning to educate people through my Smarter in Seconds series. And I talk fast sometimes because I've grown up being used to getting interrupted, which is also, part of that anti-Blackness and sexism that I suffer under. So that's just a little bit about me. And I also wear a hijab. That's why you see this colorful hijab. And I just feel that making education interesting is of utmost importance.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. I just want to say, I personally also am Black and identify as queer, so I'm a huge fan of you and all of your work.
Thank you so much.
Yes. So what were your personal experiences with diversity as a young person?
So as a young person, I would often say that I didn't grow up in a diverse space, but I did. It just wasn't diverse as it just wasn't as diverse as it could be, right? Just because there's not diversity to our satisfaction doesn't mean that it's not there. So I went to school in San Marino, and in San Marino, it's predominantly Asian and predominantly white. But even within that, there's tons of diversity. There's many different countries in Asia. What we describe as Asia is vast. So we had Sri Lankan folks, Indian, Pakistani, Taiwanese, Chinese, folks from all across the Asian diaspora. And that really informed a lot of the work that we did. So at school, I was the only Black girl in most of my classes, but we had such a rich experience, and the school was organized in a way where if we felt that parts of our communities weren't being represented, there were mechanisms to have us represented. So for example, a group of mothers got together from the East Asian community to celebrate Lunar New Year. And we had somebody whose parents own like a Chinese restaurant and we all got to put our little like fortunes inside of fortune cookies and learn the history of fortune cookies, and celebrate Japanese celebrations of the girl and the boy and Day of the Child. And so it was a very rich and diverse experience, but it was lacking representation from the Black diaspora. And so that's what I was able to provide. And it kind of turned into me feeling like I was an ambassador of all Black people. And I definitely took that on myself. And it was a little bit reinforced at home, where I felt like just very much aware that I was going to be the only Black person that these folks, interacted with for most of their lives. And I definitely was leaning into respectability, but of course I was also like 7. So forgive myself for that, but I just felt like I had to be perfect and I had to present parts of my community. And so when it would be time for Black History Month, I would give little lectures like what I'm doing now in front of my class. So it was great training ground, because that's what I do now for a living. But I think that with diversity, we have to consider the fact that even though we feel like uniquely positioned to do it, we can't push ourselves past our own limits or feel like we have to individually solve these lacks and gaps in diversity. But if we want to do that, then it's absolutely important for older people to support younger people who want to do that, and for younger people to support each other in doing that. So yeah, diversity was a defining characteristic of my childhood, whether it was just not diversity that was super representational or diversity that lacked my specific identities. But I mean, when I was growing up later, when I was an adolescent, in my teens, Senator Obama was running for president. And a lot of the white parents would come and ask me, what does young Black America think about Obama? And they would say exactly like that. And I'd be like, okay, well, as young Black America, and I would want to give informed responses when I absolutely could have been trolling them. That's also allowed. But I would basically try to give my best responses. And it made me feel like I had to be super hyper informed. So through that internal and external pressure, I started to learn how to look up current events, how to be versed in different subject matter, how to be able to have conversations with people across age levels and authority levels, and really hold my own. Again, something that served me super well in the career path that I decided to take, but something that I think robbed me a little bit of just being able to be a kid, and not feeling like I had to be a spokesperson of my community. So yeah, that's pretty much, it's been my whole life, diversity. And it's served me well, again, because now I do education specifically around this at all times. But I wonder if I might have taken a different path under different circumstances.
Yeah. I can definitely resonate with what you've said about feeling like there's a lack of representation. I think I've definitely felt that in my own life, and that's why I love YCD so much. I feel like I've been able to connect with other youth who like really care about this work and learning about other people. And so I think that's really important. I definitely agree that there can be a fine line between like diversity and representation.
Absolutely.
So you talked a little bit, when you were talking about your identity, you talked a little bit about intersectionality. So for those who are not familiar with the word, what is intersectionality and how do you navigate your own intersectionality?
Awesome. So yes, so we get the word from Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, and there's a bit of confusion about the difference between someone who coins the word and somebody who creates the theory behind it. And a good example is when we look at veganism. The word vegan was created by a man named, I believe, Donald Watkins, but don't quote me on that. Look it up yourself. In the 1940s, he didn't invent the idea of being good to animals and not eating animal products. Many different people groups have done that across time, specifically if we look at Hindu people. So that preceded this guy, but because of white supremacy, often when a white person creates a name for something, then it is assumed that they've also created the theory behind it. And so with Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, we get kind of an inverse situation because of something called misogynoir, which is anti-blackness and misogyny at the same time, misogynoir. And we get that framework from Moya Bailey and from Trudy. And because of that, there's the assumption or need to hyper focus on, well, she didn't invent the term. Well, she didn't actually invent the term intersectionality. Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw absolutely did, but she admits herself that the need for it preceded her coinage of the term. So that's an important kind of both and conversation to have. So intersectionality, sometimes we learn incorrectly that it's just naming off who we are. Like, oh, I live at the intersection of Black Street and Woman Street. Like, cool. Or Woman Avenue. But it's not just that. It's looking at the context that we come into, and that context is absolutely so key. And so Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw wrote an essay in 1989 called Demarginalizing the Intersection of Race and Sex. And in this essay, she presents different legal cases and talks about how because many of the legal case frameworks in the civil rights framework were doing a singular view of people's identities, Black women were being left out. So anti-racist discourse was only looking at race, not gender, not anything else. And so because of patriarchy, Black men were being essentialized and everyone else was being removed, specifically Black women. And then we have the feminist discourse, which was only looking at gender. And again, because of white supremacy, white women were being essentialized. So Black women were being erased. And because of these, the failure to recognize overlapping and simultaneous identities, not only in like historical frameworks and struggle work, but also like in civil rights legislation and in the ways that cases were being fought, Dr. Crenshaw's a legal scholar. So that was the framework she was looking at. But the thing is, that's super important, I think for folks to recognize, is that hate is intersectional. Hate is coming at you, and it don't really care what identity you are. In many ways, hate is discriminatory, but also does not discriminate in doing that. When I get a hate message on Instagram, I'm not getting something that's like, hey, Blair, I hate the woman part of you, and I'm coming after you for that. It's usually just like, I don't like you. I'm going to say some disrespectful stuff and dehumanize you. But I can't tell if it's because I'm Black, if it's because I'm Muslim, if it's because I'm bisexual. Sometimes, and most of the time, it's because of all I am at all times. So whether or not our progressive movements are intersectional, movements against us are, because they're not just going after one person at a time. White supremacy isn't just anti-Blackness, it's also anti-Semitism, it's also patriarchy, it's also toxic masculinity, it's also homophobic, it's all these things, Islamophobic. And so we have to be, as progressives and as people who are committed to diversity, inclusion, liberation, and freedom, intersectional in our work. And Dr. Jennifer C. Nash helps us understand that intersectionality by itself is not a tactic for fighting liberation, but it's a lens that we can look through to create tactics. So there's a slight difference there, but it's an important difference because sometimes people will say, I'm intersectional. Cool. But intersectional what? I'm intersectional in my approaches to fighting things, beautiful. But just saying it by itself is a little bit vague. And so we always have to root it in this context. And the way I describe it when I speak to like young folks, especially when I was touring last year, I would say it's like knowing Old Town Road, but not knowing Lil Nas X or the context that made Lil Nas X collaborate with Billy Ray Cyrus. Like that's a lot richer of a story for Old Town Road and makes it much more important to celebrate that triumph. And looking at Lil Nas X himself, a Black queer man, you know, and working with within the industry to get his message across. So if we just look at the word intersectionality outside of, you know, looking at misogynoir, without looking at Dr. Jennifer C. Nash, then without looking at Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, then we are missing so much of the point. So it's multiple things. So how I navigate myself, we are not generally taught how to hold our identities together as multiple things and move forward in the world. That's through representation. Oftentimes we have to create composites of representation to fit for ourselves. Like, oh, well, none of the Disney princesses look exactly like me, but I'm kind of like if Tiana was mixed with Belle, was mixed with this, and had the attitude of this person. And we have to create composites. And the propensity to do that is ingenious. I mean, we don't have representation sometimes, so we find it and we make it ourselves. And we have representations from our own family histories and from our own communities. That's beautiful. But what intersectionality allows us to do is to create educational and representational materials that honor multiple identities and also help us to honor the complexity of humanity. Because without intersectionality, we're expected to be in line with the dominant culture, and that if we're outside of it, too bad. When in actuality, the dominant culture is very small relative to human diversity. And so with intersectionality, we can allow people to be their full selves, to honor that complexity, and to not limit ourselves into these small and narrow and inadequate definitions of who we are and who we can be. So intersectionality, we got the term in 1989, but the need for it has been forever, because humans have forever been complex.
Absolutely. And speaking of your identity, you came out on a national platform. What was that experience like for you?
So, okay, I'm a Scorpio, and I feel like that's important for you to know for this next story. Okay, so I went on a TV show called Tucker Carlson Tonight. Yes, that one. And if you're watching on YouTube, definitely stay tuned, but it's available on YouTube if you want to watch the interview. Basically, I was at the end of my time working at Planned Parenthood. I worked at Planned Parenthood from 2016 to 2017. And in my last month there, I got an inquiry to talk about the safe space initiative that was being created in Australia, where a group of imams, religious leaders in Islam, came together and were saying that instead of, harassing and surveilling people to feel included in the Australian community, that they should create spaces where people could talk about different things. Because what extremism is at its core is alienating and pushing people to places of desperation through capitalism, where they feel as though they have to turn to something extreme in order to find some sort of meaning. And it's a lot more complicated than that, but that's a good baseline meaning. And so alienating people further has been demonstrated to lead to further radicalization, but instead having a place where people could talk about the difficult things, talk about the things that are making them feel as though there's no other option than to turn to extremism, is a lot more effective. And so the conversation turned into safe spaces. And as we know, safe spaces are a very contentious term. So at Planned Parenthood, I was a communications officer there. And so I had a message triangle. And here's a little tip for y'all. Here's your message triangle, right? So in the middle, you have your main idea. Okay. So let's use this one right here. Everyday people. Oops. Never mind. Okay, so we'll use, I'll grab it 1 second. Ooh, working from home. Okay, so this beautiful message that one of my smarties embroidered for me: everyday people make history every day. Okay, so if that's the middle of our message triangle, then we're going to support that. I'll use the civil rights movement as an example. I will use the Little Rock Nine as an example, and then I'll use the YCD conference as an example. And that is the message triangle, okay? So we have the key point in the middle, and then we have these 3 points to support it: the entire civil rights movement, Little Rock Nine, YCD Youth Conference, as everyday people making history every day. And so my basic talking points for Tucker Carlson, that I had been training people in talking points for an entire year, so I felt a little bit self-confident in my abilities, which is okay. But I basically was like, okay, well, my main point is that safe spaces are a good thing because they help to bring people together. And I kind of knew that I wasn't going to get his attention or change his mind, because when we do difficult conversations, we have to remember that we're not always there to change somebody's mind. For me, my goal was to get in front of millions more people than I would have had access to otherwise and help them see a different angle. And also knowing that I wouldn't be on the same playing field as Tucker Carlson because it's his show, but at least, trusted that they wouldn't edit my stuff out of context. Anyway, so as I'm going through my message triangle, talking about the imams in Australia, talking about what radicalization does, and then talking about how other communities need safe spaces too, I was on my last point and I was making good progress. And I was saying that LGBTQ communities need safe spaces from hate crimes. Black people need safe spaces from police violence. And I was getting ready to say in Muslims, and he said, well, you're not here to speak on behalf of those communities, because again, this person, Tucker Carlson, was not looking intersectionally at what it meant to be a person. It was very much a singular unified, oh, well, you have to be adhering to whiteness, cis, heteropatriarchy, Christian dominance, whatever. And I was like, well, fully forgetting I was on TV, mind you. Well, actually, in addition to being a Black person, or in addition to being a Muslim woman, I'm a Black queer person. And that's how I came out on national TV, because I forgot that I was on TV, and I was just adamant that I would correct him. And overnight, I was the queer Muslim, and that's not accurate at all. That was very tokenizing. There are so many different queer Muslims, many of whom are out, many of whom are not. Really depends on the context of that individual person. But I was so like, I just wanted to put kind of everything back into the Pandora's box, because if you've ever come out, for folks who are listening, when you come out, there's sometimes that immediate like, oh my gosh, make it go back to how it was before, because it's this new uncharted territory. That's really with anything, not just queerness, anything that is outside of what society has told us that we're allowed to be, whether that's I don't want to go to college, I dropped out of a class, I didn't get into the college that you expected me to go to, things like that. It might feel like, oh my goodness, after I'd let you know this information, I want to put that back to me, because it might not have gone how we expect it. But for me, like, I got a lot of hate, but I also got a lot of love, and a lot of people who were ready to like embrace me and cherish me and hold me close and protect me, particularly GLAD, which is an excellent advocacy organization. And they were very quickly having my back and making sure that I felt secure and protected, and were guiding me through different media stuff. But oh man, like the next day I had news outlets saying like, Blair, can you come and comment on your appearance in Tucker Carlson tonight? And I was like, no, because I was so traumatized. But it's important to remember that even though there's opportunities that were presented, we don't always have to say yes to them, especially if they are harmful to our own psyches, or to our own well-beings. Saying no is okay. We don't have to take every opportunity that's presented to us. But basically, what happened out of Tucker Carlson tonight is that I came out to everybody in my life at one time, which was very efficient. I don't know if it's recommendable, but it certainly was efficient. And then I also was able to get a book deal. I was trying to get Modern Herstory sold as a book deal, and that ended up happening. And then, of course, Making Our Way Home ended up happening, and now I have my third book deal. And so it kind of put me onto this national stage. And the thing is, sometimes people, especially folks who are my loved ones, will say, oh, you could have done better, da, da, da. Well, too bad. I can't go backward. It's like somebody told me that my senior quote from 2012 had a typo in it. I literally can't do anything about it. So I feel very content with how it has gone. Of course, it wasn't perfect. Life isn't perfect. But it definitely shifted my trajectory, and it was not planned. I have a lot of friends who knew me when I was at LSU, who were in my communication studies classes, who were like, wow, Blair, that was a genius move for you to intentionally come out on a massive platform and totally upend your life. And I was like, yeah, I don't have my life together that much to be able to plan something so meticulously, but thank you for believing in me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And based on your experience coming out, how would you recommend that youth handle hate connected to their own identities?
So I think that the way that we have to understand when people are hateful toward us is that it tends to not have anything to do with us. This is because if someone's saying hateful things about you, spreading rumors, saying blatant lies, clearly it's not about you, because those things are not rooted in fact. And there's a difference between holding someone accountable and bullying them. Accountability is when somebody has failed to live up to a promise, or who has violated an expectation and has been harmful. And the difference with that is, if somebody has violated an expectation and been harmful, then they have that opportunity to repair it and to do better in the future. If they consistently are harmful, that's a different conversation. You might have to decide to not engage with them whatsoever. But alternatively, bullying people, even if it's in the context of accountability, let's look at Ted Cruz, for example. Ted Cruz basically was very negligent in his promises to the people of Texas, decided to go on a vacation. That whole debacle is playing out. But when it comes to holding him accountable, commenting on his facial hair misses the point and is a case of, attacking a person versus attacking their problematicness. Now, am I going to stand up here and defend Ted Cruz's facial hair? No. I'm just using this as an example for what it means, the difference between bullying and accountability. And so, one second. Okay, sorry. So when it comes to our own identities, it's similar. Well, it's just kind of looking at when somebody is being critical of us in a way to harm us, or is being critical of us in a way to improve us, or to be critical in a way that helps us fortify ourselves. For example, if somebody was watching and was like, Blair, you spoke a little bit too fast during this lecture. I would say, thank you. I'll remember to speak a little bit slower next time. But if that person's saying like, Blair, I hate your fashion choices and whatever, that's clearly not having to do with me. And so that's more of a surface level thing. But if they're attacking my identity, say, for example, the people that I get messages from every day who are like, you can't be Muslim and gay. First of all, I'm bisexual, get it right. And yes, I can be because I clearly am. And then the other thing is that I do not know this person. I'm not seeking religious or advice on my eternal soul from this person. And they are feeling the need to harass and harm me because I do not live up to the expectations that they have put onto me without my consent. And that's the huge thing here. If somebody is asking you to live up to expectations that you were not made aware of previously, that you did not agree to previously, that did not align with what you want in life, it's not your responsibility to fulfill that. And that has to do with so many different things, whether or not you want to have kids, whether or not you want to pursue a certain career. If somebody wants you to be a doctor and you have no desire in your heart to do that yourself and that does not fulfill you, you have to determine whether or not that's an expectation you want to consent to. And it really depends, because it might be that your parents only want to pay for you to go to college if you choose that path. That's a decision you have to make on your own. And you might be able to take other classes. Say you want to be a sculptor. Well, maybe while you're in medical school, you can take sculpting classes on the side and do both. It really depends on the person. But when people attack our identities, we have to remember that our identities compose our personal identity. And we have a social identity. Sometimes those line up. A lot of times they don't. But if somebody attacks our personal identity, they can attack it all they want, but it doesn't change because it's personal. And whether or not we're able to express it in our social context doesn't always happen, but it doesn't negate the other.
Yeah. So I want to wrap up by highlighting a little bit more of you. So what are some projects that you're working on now, and how can youth get involved?
Yes. So I'm doing so many different projects. And I think young people, y'all have it together. I mean, just seeing this conference and how it's gone, well done, mashallah, as we say. And so I think that young people are doing so much important work. One organization that I'm working with right now is Students Against Child Marriage. And that's an organization to end child marriage in the United States, which is very harmfully legal in 46 states. And for context, when people hear this, they might jump to the conclusion that it's like 17-year-olds marrying their like 19-year-old sweetheart. But it's very harmful. It's much more serious than that. It's basically legalized child abuse. And so if you go to studentsagainst.org, you can see a lot of different materials there, and it's something that's affecting people right in your age group. So I would look into those types of things. There's also so many things that are being fought right now, and if you're interested, like anyone who's listening, including yourself, if you're interested in doing advocacy work, right now is the time, because with the Biden administration, so many of the things that we were hoping would become a baseline for equality are in place. For example, genital mutilation is now banned across the US, or is in process of being banned across the US. Conversion therapy in the process of being banned across the US. These things are so close to being codified or are on the way to. That means that we have the opportunity to evolve past that. And that's what young people can be a part of right now. If you're seeing something in your community and you're feeling like, oh man, I can't even participate in that, there's no way I can change that, odds are yes. And odds are people are hiring because they have more resources, because they're not constantly trying to hold the world together. And so is that making sense? Like the shift from what we hoped like would be the baseline, like, oh my gosh, can we please just make sure that everyone has, this? Okay, they have this. Let's dream bigger. And so there's a lot of internships that are being rolled out right now. And you can check those out on different progressive websites, going to the different websites that you're concerned about. Say you want to work with the ACLU, check them out. So many internships are happening, and a lot of them are remote, which means, and it's so exciting, like I'm lighting up, because when I was a young person, when I was y'all's age, you couldn't get an internship unless you could afford to move to DC, afford to move to New York. Right now, that is ridiculous because we're in a pandemic. So you'll have to work from home, and you've already gotten the skills to working at school virtually, organizing conferences virtually. So look at different things like resume creation workshops. A lot of this stuff is available on YouTube, is available on Skillshare, is available on Instagram, is just available out here ready to go, and utilize it. Use Google like it has the entire world's knowledge right at your fingertips, because in many cases that is true. And don't do the thing that we often do ourselves, not because we have just low self-esteem, but because the world is constantly telling us that we're inadequate, right? That's the difference. It's not our fault that we're starting to believe the things that we've been told since childhood. It's also inevitable, but remember that it's not always true. Rarely is it true. But don't stop yourself from pursuing an opportunity because you don't feel qualified. Let them tell you that. Don't decide that for yourself. And so rise to the occasion because the time is now. And just figure out how you can, you know, position yourself in ways to say yes and not stop yourself from being participating in different initiatives. The last thing I'll say about that when it comes to young people as a retired organizer is sometimes I'll see young people who will say something like, oh, I want to start something. Starting something is great, but what ends up being more fruitful is fortifying things that already are going on and are being effective. It's a difference between somebody saying, oh, I want to build a car. Okay, that's going to take a lot of time for you to build. But maybe somebody else has a great car, but needs your expertise to program part of that car. Okay, that's where you can be more helpful, and that's how you'll get further faster. But if it's the case that the other people who have been working on it also are trying to build the car and haven't started yet, maybe you collaborate with them. Maybe you try to, cross pollinate, think about different ideas, collaborate, and be, communal in that aspect. It really depends on the context. But things like YCD, I think, are a great place to start expressing with your peers. Does anybody else think that this is a problem? Oh, you do? Do you have ideas? Okay, I also have ideas. Let's start to build and move forward there. But don't feel like you have to wait to be a certain age to get things done, or that you have to have a certain level of understanding. Because the truth is, a lot of us are trying to figure it out as we go. And we're just a little bit older than y'all. But y'all have a great mastery of things like social media, of things like personal branding. And that definitely should make you feel confident that you can get the work done and support the work as well.
Yeah, that's all super awesome. I know I'm definitely interested in getting involved in new things always, but especially as I graduate high school and move to the next chapter of my life. So thank you for sharing, and I'm sure there's many youth watching right now who are interested in those opportunities. And with that being said, I would like to thank you once again, Blair, for joining us today. It's been great.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you.